Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Could you talk a little bit about confusion as an avoidance technique?
Confusion as an avoidance technique. Well, first of all, we all get confused. Confusion just means lack of clarity. So there can be honest confusion also. It's not always a ploy to avoid clarity. And we go through different periods in our life when we have more or less clarity or more or less confusion. And, in Jyotish, these are kind of mapped out when we're going to feel more self-doubt or more confusion about things and how to navigate those things. But setting that aside, because that really wasn't what your question was about, there's a way in which we are often trying to conform to what other people want us to be, how other people want us to show up, how other people want us to sound, or what they want us to say, or how they want us to relate, or how we think we have to be acceptable, or to avoid criticism, or to avoid some kind of disparagement. And some of those things are expectations that might be in our family or other microenvironments, but a lot of those expectations are really part of a much larger social, societal, cultural, global even situation. For instance, gender. In most cultures around the world, there are very different expectations for male-appearing beings and female-appearing beings. And so if you happen to be female-appearing, or you once were female-appearing or something like that, you have that experience, then confusion as a strategy is a way of avoiding a kind of violence. And what is that you're avoiding? You're avoiding being clear about what you want and you don't want, because you might get pushback simply for being clear, for being decisive, for being confident about what you want or don't want, or how you want things to be or you don't want them to be. So simply being asked a question and answering it confidently and clearly can, if you're a female appearing person, can sometimes bring criticism of some sort or another. So saying that you're confused and maybe even potentially generating a feeling of confusion is a way of not having to stand on your own clarity and deferring to other people and avoiding that kind of pushback. There's another circumstance in which many, many people pretend, either consciously or unconsciously, to not know what they want. And that could be anybody. That's when what we actually want would cause a lot of discomfort to ourselves. For instance, if we're in a relationship that we want to get out of, and we know we want to get out of this relationship, we know it's not what we want, or maybe somewhere in us we know what we want, maybe it's only semi-conscious, but that relationship is bringing us a lot of financial stability, or social capital, or just a level of comfort that we're used to. We like the house we're living in, or something like that. Then, or we just are afraid of being alone. There's nothing even great about the relationship, and the other person has no money, but we just don't want to be alone. And sometimes in those circumstances, we generate an experience of confusion in order not to have to make a decision based on our clarity, because we don't like the imagined repercussions of that decision. This happens when people are trying to make decisions about major life changes. Leaving a relationship, leaving a job, moving somewhere, those kind of big changes where there's just going to be a period of feeling unsettled and uncertain. Those kind of transitions are unsettling for everybody, no matter what your circumstances are. And of course, if it's about a relationship, there's the specter of being alone. If it's about a job, there's possibly the specter of I'll never get another job again. I'm going to be poor, and that's terrible or something. So some of the things we fear might be real. Some of them might be distant possibilities or not possibilities at all. But in any case, we generate a feeling of not knowing and sort of having all these different options that we can't decide on because we actually are afraid to make a choice based on our own clarity. Those are sort of two different circumstances. Trying to avoid retribution for being clear is one mode of deploying confusion in a certain sense. And that just because we're deploying it doesn't mean that we don't feel it. It could be that we're just lying. We do know what we want and we're just saying we're confused to back out of a situation we're afraid of. Or we could actually feel confused. We might just generate a feeling of confusion arising out of a kind of panic. So there's that, and then there's sort of not wanting to take our hits, not wanting to take our losses, even when we know it's the best thing to do, because we have fears, and so we generate a feeling of confusion. That kind of covers the bases, I think. I noticed this isn't, a teaching I received or anything, but I noticed this since I was a little girl, because I often had a lot of clarity about what I wanted or didn't want, or just the kind of clarity about what I was seeing, not necessarily about what I wanted for myself, but my interpretation of things, of relationships and events and things like that. And I felt a lot of clarity about those things. And as a young girl and then as a woman, I quite regularly have received some kind of negative feedback about that. How do you know? Oh, you're clear about that, or wow, you didn't hesitate there. No one would ever say that to a boy. You would not get criticized for not hesitating when you're saying what you want. That would seem almost ridiculous. So I started noticing it when I was very, very little. And then when I got older, I noticed how, especially when I started doing divinations and Jyotish readings for people, I just started noticing how people would come in saying, oh, I'm so confused about X, Y, or Z. And then if we do the divination, we do the reading, and it tells them to change jobs or leave a relationship, and the person will say, oh, I knew that all along, So I started to notice how confusion functioned in those circumstances. And I often feel like in those areas of life, doing divinations and Jyotish, my function is to just tell people what they already know, basically. And I actually consider that to be one of the signs of a good reading. If someone says, I already knew that, it just kind of uncovered their clarity for them, right? Now, sticking to it is another question, because sometimes we get clarity, then we get afraid, so we cover it up with some confusion. I have more questions. No, what about this? What about that? What about the other? And then they come back for more divinations and more Jyotish, but then I just make money off of everyone's confusion.
There's been quite a bit of activity in terms of people coming and going. I would like to hear a little bit about being lost, feeling lost in relation to the loss, like to a shifting situation.
In terms of loss, and when things are just changing, I've been doing practice for many decades now, and I've noticed that in spiritual communities, when people leave or when new people come, there is, for certain people, a sense of destabilization or loss or even fear. Whenever people leave, there are people who feel very close to those people, and of course, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, at least with Jaya Kula, if somebody leaves and you're friends with them, there's no reason why you can't keep right on being friends with them. Nobody is ousted from this community in such a way that anyone would be encouraged not to be friends with people that they're friends with. But nonetheless, it is destabilizing, and it causes people to examine their own reasons for being in this community or any community that you happen to be in. So it does give people an opportunity for contemplation and to see how things are with yourself, right? Not just with the person who left. And then when people come who are new, First of all, some people experience that as very fresh and exciting and really love that. Other people feel threatened by it. I've heard that many, many times. Not as much in this community, although occasionally, but in some other communities I've been in, people were really threatened by new people coming and were worried that new people were spiritually more advanced or something like that. I've heard that numerous times. This kind of tradition, first of all, there's always coming and going in any spiritual tradition. I mean, that's just what happens. And of course, we have a wide range of ages in this community. Every decade is represented, except maybe 90. I don't think we have any 90-year-olds yet. But in any case, if you look out over the people at teachings here, you're going to see a lot of young people. Whereas if you look out other places, you're going to see a lot of older people. So what happens when somebody comes to anything, not just Jaya Kula, but any group, any endeavor, even a whole career, when they're in their 20s, by the time they're in their late 30s or early 40s, they might want to do something different. So it's not always a sad thing when someone leaves, but it is sad if you have relationships with them and you want to have a sense of continuity in a community. But we do have a lot of continuity in any case.
Sometimes at points of people's ages, it's possible certain practices don't make sense for them anymore, or a deity might start speaking to them more, or a different sadhana.
That is absolutely true, especially if you've been practicing all those years. Again, in this kind of tradition, there's a tendency for people to come younger and to be more aggressive and tightening about their practice. I certainly was. And then as they get older and practice more, you just relax. So you're not as aggressive and you're not as attracted maybe to all of the super duper complex practices. Maybe you want to do things in a simpler way. And then eventually you're just really doing things very, very simply and integrating. And that is one of the things that is noted in the scriptures of this tradition, that as we become more realized, everything just simplifies. The simpler practices are actually considered to be the more advanced practices. Can anyone say why?
Maybe one thing is there's not as much to distract yourself with.
Yeah, exactly. So when we first start practicing, in general, I mean, unless we come into this world in some extraordinary condition, in general, we're very distractible. It's hard to sit for an hour and keep focused on what we're doing. And if we have a lot to do, if we have incense to light and bells to ring and pretty pictures and deities to look at and beads to run through our fingers and gestures to make, and if we're kept very busy with body, energy, and mind and more complicated practices, that helps to unify our energy and keep us focused on sadhana. It kind of repatterns us. But then later, when we are already largely repatterned, we don't need all those accoutrements. We don't need to be doing all that. We might want to do it just because it's pretty and fun. It's kind of like playing with toys. But we won't have to. We'll be less distracted from the natural state than we were when we were younger. So things tend to simplify.
I just wondered about someone's constitution or the way they come into this lifetime being suitable for a certain type of practice.
Every spiritual tradition has flavors, has aesthetics, has modes of communication, has visual imagery and music and a view, and all of those things are part of what might attract or repel somebody to a certain tradition. Part of what might say, well, this seems like it suits me, or I'm attracted to this versus I'm not. So for instance, I like the relative chaos of the Hindu traditions. I like the mess that's made during rituals. I like all the colors. I like the music and all other kinds of aesthetic things about it. And when I look at Zen traditions, I appreciate their aesthetic, but I don't really want to be around it much. All the formalism and everything being so neat and clean and the black and the white. I appreciate it as an aesthetic that has its own beauty, but I don't really resonate with it. It doesn't thrill me or anything. So I think those things are very important. And ultimately, the view of the tradition and finding someone to actually work with are the most important thing, at least in terms of these traditions. But I do think that aesthetics and the sort of general tone or flavor, and for instance, the general tone or flavor of Trika is celebratory. It celebrates our life here together. Whereas in some other traditions, our life here together is only considered a source of misery and everything in between. Some people really like this sort of finger wagging, you know, you have to get out of this place as quickly as you possibly can and go somewhere else, and then you'll finally be happy or be saved or something. And, you know, that really, really attracts some people. And it just doesn't attract me. So I think it is very important that we have all these different traditions with all these different aesthetics and flavors and tones. And that means that more people have a chance of finding something that attracts them and feels right for them. So I think that's true. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.